Amazing conversation with you, Caroline. A lot of insights, what you shared, really bringing a lot of value to this conversation. Any final message you would like to communicate to the leaders, upcoming leaders, and the professionals out there?
Yeah, I think, I thought hard about this when I saw that question. And I had to think, so I thought back to where I was several years ago. And a lot of leaders I speak to are deflated, they are burnt out, they are stuck, they are frustrated. And I would just say that wherever you are is actually a great place to be. I think we always think in leadership in terms of solving problems, but sometimes I think problems come up to solve us. So it's like, it's instead of rushing out there to kind of get a quick fix to your problem, it's like, it's what is the problem there to tell me? What is the problem there to show me? Because that's...
Namaste. Friends, welcome to the Let's Talk Show. Let's Talk Show brings a lot of value in your understanding, knowledge, and overall wisdom. Friends, we bring industry experts, entrepreneurs, and the people, those who have gone through really struggle time, and the lot of inspiration you can get from this show and the talk what these people are doing on Let's Talk Show. Hello friends, welcome to Dear Life by Pankaj Sharma. And in this channel, you can see the most insightful podcast that is called the Let's Talk Show. Friends, welcome to this 18th episode of Let's Talk Show. In this podcast, we are bringing something which is very, very important and incredible to all of you. If you are a leader, if you are a CEO of a company, if you are a business decision maker, this podcast is going to be a big transformative lesson for all of you. In this podcast, we are bringing Caroline. She is into the coaching industry from last many decades, and she has been a coach to Richard Branson of Virgin Airlines, United States of America. Caroline is sharing about her insights, her experiences about coaching industry, what the coaching is exactly, and how coaching really differentiates from teaching, training, and mentoring. Friends, this is the podcast which you can learn here about so many insights, what a leader need to do when it comes to a difficult time, tough time, and a critical time, how HR can really contribute in terms of shaping the organization. So let's welcome Caroline and listen to this podcast. If you have any question and query, please put it in the comment section. And friends, the most important thing, please subscribe to the channel and share this podcast with all your friends and the colleagues. Please watch all our previous podcasts. If you have any question, if you have any confusion, these podcasts are really very insightful and bringing a lot of value to your knowledge and overall wisdom. Thank you so much. And let's listen from Caroline.
But I think, what's nice here is we just enter into a conversation about a topic I think we're both really fascinated in, and that's leadership, right?
Yeah. So shall we begin?
Please, yeah, let's go right ahead. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining for this Let's Talk Show.
It's really good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Pankaj.
Caroline, I'm really impressed the way you were sharing during that panel discussion about the structure and the kind of granularity and the clarity which you have. And I thought that let's have this conversation to reach to larger audience and bring your thoughts in front of them so that they can also learn a lot of things from you. So let's begin with the first question. Please share your journey in brief. How have you come up to this level of coaching people on the leadership and all?
Right. Yes. Yes. Thank you. That discussion on Saturday, I think it was fascinating to have everybody together. So it was great to meet you there. So my journey, I think I shared a little bit on Saturday. My leadership journey began some too many years ago to remember now. While I was leading in quite a high profile role in Richard Branson's Virgin Group. And I was on a rotating pool of senior managers that went around the world setting up and running airlines in different countries. So I had the fabulous joy of working with Richard, certainly in the early days when the organization was still in its very entrepreneurial stage and writing its policies on the back of fag packets, as I would say. So it was very young. And so one of those journeys was to set up and launch Virgin's first operation on the African continent. So that took me into South Africa, which I loved. And pretty early on in my leadership journey, I was a really high achiever. I was a master at my craft. I was really good in the sales arena, really good with working with people, with bringing business in. And that's what took me into a sales role. And pretty soon in my leadership journey, I was probably in my mid-30s, I really hit the wall through burnout. Because at that time I didn't understand leadership as it was. I didn't understand the internal changes that were important to make in terms of moving forward. And I just kept trying harder at what I was doing all along, which is where I work with a lot of people right now in terms of coaching. So this experience with burnout, I think really it prompted like a crisis of meaning, I guess, for me. In so many respects, it wasn't just about stress, which is what so many people think burnout is. It's a complicated jigsaw puzzle of a number of factors, which involves relationships, which involves the culture, which is the way that you're structured on the inside, and also the connection to something bigger than yourself. So it threw a lot of that into the mix for me, and prompted, I suppose, a massive change in my direction and my career, where I started to really focus on the things in leadership that I thought that I was really crap at, really bad at. So how do I get better at that? But also, how do I, heal myself? How do I go on this internal journey as well? So this journey was also a very spiritual journey for me. I work a lot. I'm a meditation trainer with a beautiful organization in Hyderabad in India called the Heartfulness Institute. And I've always marveled at how spirituality is so woven into the Indian culture, where for me, it certainly wasn't, growing up. I'm half English, half Irish, growing up in the UK. So this was a big journey, I think, to really connect that and connect with myself. So that's how I came into this work. And it's for the last 20 years. My learning journey, I've been fortunate to work with some incredible organizations like Google and Facebook and Deloitte and Ernst & Young. And learn from them. So I just really feel that I'm just this consummate learner, always learning new things, which is how we ended up here.
Caroline, you have been in touch with so many, the best leaders, like you shared about the Richard Branson. The name is who do not know about Virgin and the Richard. How things are changing, how leadership style is evolving globally.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for me to, to say how. I mean, what I see when I speak to a lot of, in my coaching work with a lot of leaders, what I see is that many leaders, particularly young leaders, people coming into leadership, people who've got new roles, and even more senior people who have reached what I call their edge, are stuck in that similar mindset to where I was stuck when I hit burnout. Which is this high achieving mindset, just push more, do, drive, get things done. And it's having quite disastrous consequences, I think, not just in this burnout culture that we're seeing kind of around the world, but also lackluster change results, employee disengagement, all the things that you'll be, probably far more familiar with than I am, Pankaj. But I think that there's a call globally for leaders to grow up. And that means understanding who I am in the context of the world that I'm working in as well. So it has a lot to do with our identity and how the identity that we attach to our roles and ourselves as leaders, and the ability to be able to almost let go of that and expand our bandwidth in some way. So much focus is in leadership development is on what I call horizontal development, which is, like adding more apps to your phone. It's about, let's teach people conflict resolution skills. Let's teach people critical thinking. Let's teach people decision making and all of those kind of things. So like there's, you know, there's this perception that there's this easy answer, a 5-step process to leadership. You know, that simply isn't the case, you know. So leadership really is about evolving our mindset and expanding the size of that container, if you like, to be able to take more, to deal with more. So a lot of leadership, I think, still focuses very much on building these skills and not enough in expanding that container to be able to understand, who am I in this context? What's needed right now to generate the right kind of action to get the results that we want, the results that we're looking for? Because we forget that there's a human being in there. You know, we are so focused still on the do. How do we, the first thing we go to in a meeting is like, well, what's next? What's the first item on the agenda? And we forget that there's a human being in that, a human being that has cares, that has concerns. And so this one size fits all strive, drive mentality to keep pushing for results is missing the mark when it comes to tapping into connection and motivation and the things that people want in their working environment right now: more meaning, more connection, more purpose. So I think that's where leadership is starting to evolve and is probably the way of the future for sure. That's it from my perspective.
Yeah, Caroline, in this conversation, you shared a couple of times regarding the mindset of a leader, and which is the basic root of, you know, how they drive, how they behave, how they conduct, you know, day-to-day activities with their team members, and which is the main reason for the performance and the non-performance in an organization. When it comes to changing the mindset, what exactly the few contributing factors which may help for a leader to change the mindset from non-productive to the productive one?
So, changing mindset always sounds so simple, and we've got this whole big thing, I think, going on globally about, you know, we've got to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. You know, we know about the what, but I think what the question that we need to ask before we go any further in terms of changing that mindset is, you know, what is to get a definition of what is leadership. Because when we talk about leadership, there's, you know, probably everybody listening to this podcast will have some kind of idea about what they think leadership is. And we tend to fall into the trap thinking that words have meanings and dictionary definitions, but they don't. Words and the meanings of words live in the mindsets and the hearts of the people that we're leading. So a lot of people think that leadership is about a title. Well, I know a lot of leaders with title, bad leaders with very high titles, actually. Often people too think about, you know, leadership is about decision making. You know, how do we make decisions? How do we get the mindset to make the right decisions? Well, I know a lot of leaders who make the right decisions, but they wonder why nobody implements them. You know, so and then there's this thing about, you know, leadership is power. You know, I know people that have a lot of power but absolutely no followers. So, you know, when it comes to the mindset, I think the first thing to think about is, well, what is leadership? And in the world that I come from, it's leaders are people who are able to articulate a future for others, and then have them commit to take the action to implement that future or to build that future. And commitment is the key word here. So it's, how do I harness the hearts and minds of people towards that? And I think that was something that Richard Branson was really good at. You know, he was, I wouldn't say he was your typical leader, but he was incredibly inspiring, but he just had a vision for wanting to do something better. And that almost like transmitted through him into the heart of Virgin, certainly in the early days. So in terms of shaping a mindset, I think the first thing that we have to tap into as leaders is well, what do we care about? You know, care and leadership seems to be kind of two really weird things that just don't kind of stack up. But as leaders, we're dealing with human beings who care. So, you know, as a leader, you've got to be more than just somebody who tries to extol the values of the organization that you're working in, even if, like me, you're like, I was like a stick of rock with Virgin stamped through it. You know, I loved the organization, I was passionate about what I did, but I wasn't really connected with why that mattered to me. And so I think, you know, what drives the disconnection in our organizations and drives the disconnection in ourselves here is that we don't have that ability to understand that. So it's getting really real and raw, I think, about, well, what matters to us? What do we care about? And care isn't just about our family and our children and, you know, having a nice house and all of those things. It's about aliveness. What is it that brings you alive? What makes you alive as a human being? And why you for this role at this time? What is it about that? And I think what happens in leadership is that we get the promotion into the next role and we think, oh, great, we've arrived. But we don't ask those bigger questions that really connect us with that role and help us to connect with others through that, because people connect with people. You know, it's people communicating. It's one nervous system communicating with another. And, you know, I can smell it if I don't feel that you're being authentic. So the first shift in terms of mindset is about understanding why am I doing this? Where am I going? What am I in this role for? Where is it taking me? And it's got to be more than just money and a title. It's got to be a way of connecting with myself and others that inspires others. And then there's a whole load of other things that kind of go around that, which maybe I'll come to later when we start to talk about qualities of leadership, which, you know, really do relate to the neuroscience of how the human being functions and how people evolve and change in a community. So I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit there.
I understand here a lot more to do with the neuro leadership. What David Rock is talking in his the coaching through neuro leadership and all. So coaching is one thing which is definitely going to help in terms of changing the leadership style of a leader, successful leaders. What are the top 5 leadership traits, Caroline, you feel that is really important for any leader to become successful?
So I talk about these because I think they can be measured. There is an incredible tool out there that I find fascinating in terms of measuring this in terms of leadership effectiveness. So the 5 for me are like this. The first is about the ability to work in a context. So it's what I think of as system awareness or context awareness. You know, performance always takes place in a context. We may think of that as culture. So are we aware of the culture and its ramifications in terms of stopping us from getting where we want to go or enabling us in terms of where we want to go? You know, so, you know, organizations are a melting pot of conflict. There is conflicts of perceptions, there's always conflicts of interest, there's conflicts of styles, conflicts of values. You know, these are all about people working together. And so, you know, it's about how are we aware of this in terms of the system, which comes back to the PAEI roles that we talked about on Saturday, you know, that what an organization is designed to do. It fits into those 4 roles. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But it's about, you know, it's about how do we manage the effectiveness and the efficiency of the organization in the short and the long term, and what are the roles within that and my role within that. So it's about that system awareness and how do I turn these natural conflicts into productive conflict rather than allowing them to become destructive conflict, which is where you get the politics and which is where all our energy goes. You know, 80% of the energy always is going internally to sort out all the challenges with the people, and only what's left gets used to kind of to move the organization and projects forward. So the first one I think is that system awareness and what's going on in the system. The second one is what I think of as achievement orientation, and this is not just about the drive, it's about the skill to be able to solve problems in a collaborative way. So, you know, it's you know, and that depends as well. The kind of problems that an organization faces depends on where it is in its life cycle. You know, are these natural problems which are growing pains, or are they problems that have become more entrenched and keep repeating themselves time and time again? So if we're looking at the ability to take action, are we seeing the same problem, the problem we're dealing with today? Was it here 6 months ago? Was it here 12 months ago? Was it here 2 years ago? Because if those problems are coming back time and again, then there's a problem somewhere in that system. So it's about how do we get together? How do we work collaboratively with others, with all of these conflicts, if you like, to be able to take that action? But more importantly, how I as a leader can actually get into the practice, the conversations, the right conversations to drive things forward, because everything is done in leadership through a conversation. You know, leadership for me is more of a, we talk about the theory of leadership, but leadership is a practice. It's a performance art. You know, you don't get out on the court at Wimbledon, like as we got Wimbledon week kind of going on here right now, and play your A game without a bit of practice. Yet we do that with leadership. We think that we can just step into a leadership role and we just try harder what we've done all along. There's a skill in working in the kind of conversations that we need to generate momentum forward. And that kind of leads me into what I think is a third quality, which is what I think of as presence and self-awareness. You know, in any conversation as a leader, how am I showing up? Am I creating environments that create a positive future with others? Because every interaction is creating something. Or is it a minor interaction which is actually diminishing and starting to create more problem? So that comes down to things like, you know, my level of presence. Can I stay anchored when the world is stressful, when the world is chaotic, when I'm dealing with a conflicting situation, or do I get triggered easily by my own things that are sitting in, you know, the nervous system? So a leader needs to be able to be firmly anchored in their own center, if you like. So that means working quite a lot with the nervous system. How am I listening? You know, our default listening when I'm listening to somebody is I'm listening for being right. You know, I want to be right, put my point of view there. So how am I listening to another kind of sits in that, you know, am I listening for what's missing, what their care is, what the possibilities are here? Or am I just engaging in this table tennis of who's right, who's wrong, and who shouts loud enough to get the answer, to get their way, which is what happens in a lot of boardrooms. It's just a melting pot of emotional conflict, if you like, for people who's shouting loud. You just watch, you see the people who are checked out, you see the ones that are just the same ones pushing their point across. So that's really destructive in terms of being able to make decisions and good decisions for the longer term. So that presence and self-awareness, that ability to be emotionally agile and shift our state is vitally important there too. So that's what I think of as the third one. The fourth trait I think of is what I think of as real courageous authenticity and the ability to learn. So it's you know, this is where leadership is the practice. It's moving from what I think of as aboutism to experience. You know, for example, I can talk a lot about emotional intelligence, but I have none. So authenticity means that I walk my talk. I know what I'm connected to. I know why I'm here. I know what I can clearly articulate the purpose of my team, not just read the bland values off the wall. And I've done the deep work with myself so that I'm able to hold the emotional spaces, if you like, that others are in, particularly where, you know, in worlds of when layoffs are happening and emotional turbulence is happening, for example, around that. Can I sit with that comfortably, or do I just move on to the next thing because that's just an uncomfortable space for me to go? Because I work with a lot of leaders who are not comfortable in that space and it creates chaos. So again, that's shaping the interaction. If you're not authentic with yourself and authentic with others, and that again is where the practice, the physical, how am I being in that interaction, and am I willing to take a stand when others are against me is what I think of as the fourth one. And the fifth one is kind of come through this is I think is that ability to connect. People who can't connect with others don't get followed. And that connection is you know, I think there's 4 roles that a leader has to play. They have to facilitate the conversation by asking the right questions. They have to be a good coach, but they need the authority from the person they're coaching to coach them. You know, leaders often think that just stepping into a leadership role makes them a coach. It doesn't. you can take a horse to water, you can drown it, but you can't make it drink. If I don't have respect for you because of all of the other things here, I don't want to be coached by you. So that's where a lot of leaders, I think, fall down there. So the facilitator, the coach, what I call the customer, you've got to be the customer for your team's promise. Your team exists as a promise in the minds of others in the organization. And by a promise, I mean a promise about a certain future that you will create. So as a leader, you've got to be able to make sure that that future is being delivered and that we are coordinating effectively with each other to make that happen. And where we can't make decisions, I step into what I think of as the fourth role, the boss, where I'm going to make a decision and everybody is behind me on that decision. It's not going out by the coffee machine and, whinging about something. I'll say yes in the meeting, but I'm not going to actually deliver on it. So big thing about making decisions and actually having the implementation there as well. So we've got to be able to connect meaningfully with others and have the conversations that drive that action and know how to do that. So those are the five things that I think of in terms of leadership skills.
Very interesting, Caroline. You are really bringing real value to this podcast. My next question is two-part. One is share some of your critical observations while coaching Indian leaders, and from global perspective, what are the 1, 2, 3 things Indian leaders need to change?
Wow, such a big question. And I don't want to be arrogant enough to say that I understand the Indian culture enough to be able to speak knowledgeably about that. I have clients from all over the globe, including India. And I spend a lot of time in India through this meditation practice and working with clients. So what I've noticed in terms of the Indian culture, and particularly a lot for women in leadership here, is that it is a culture of achievers and drivers, and there is, there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on having the right degree and going to the right university, and so there's a status around that to a certain level, and I think that it's and I can't back that up with real statistics, so this is just my observations. There's a shift that potentially needs to be made from moving out of this achiever do kind of mindset, the expert mindset, into some of those things that I've just talked about in terms of the qualities of leaders. How do I connect with others to actually make this happen? What are the conversations that are happening that are not happening in the team that are either holding us back or moving us forward? So it's, and I say this for leaders globally, it's, do I have the eyes to see what's missing in a conversation, in a team interaction, in a team dynamic, to know how to facilitate the conversation to move that forward? And that it's, and depending on where the organization is in its life cycle and what kinds of problems and what levels we're dealing at, there's a number of approaches to be able to deal with that. So a lot of companies that I work with, they have a lot of problems, and these problems just keep growing, but we have no way to be able to solve that. And so we're trying to solve it with this technical expertise, which is only one arm of the of what I call the PAEI scenario. So let me bring that in at this point, because I think that was something that was fascinating for you and some of the others in the conversations that we had on Saturday. I work a lot with the Adizes Institute out of Latvia, and I love the philosophy. For me, it just makes so much sense about change and leadership styles and these natural conflicts that I talked about. And relating it back to an organization's efficiency and effectiveness in the short and the long term. So putting it into that context, I think, will help to make sense a little bit here. So for an organization to be effective in the short term, it needs to produce results. It needs to P, using this acronym. So it's got to have customers, it's got to satisfy those customers, and it's got to have kind of repeat business to make the money kind of come in. It also needs to administer. It needs to be efficient in the short term. It's got to be able to produce results, and it's got to be able to be profitable. So do we have systems in place, if you like, that reinvent the wheel, that make us profitable? It then needs to it needs to be entrepreneuring, which is what Virgin was really good at, having its eye on the horizon, what's happening in the bigger picture, and how do I integrate that change back into the workings of the organization so that we can remain relevant and move forward, if you like. And that's what brings the vitality and energy into the organization. So that makes it effective in the longer term. And it also needs to it needs to integrate. It needs to be able to bring all of these different forces, PAEI forces together to be able to work effectively to make the organization efficient in the longer term. And that's where your culture comes in, your people come in, where we get the different styles to work together to harness these conflicts. And so much of what I see, and again, in my experience of some of the Indian cultures, is that we have a lot of P&A. There's a lot of drive, a lot of producing, a lot of A in terms of administering and technical expertise. But in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of E and not a lot of I. And good leaders need to be able to step out of that PA mindset into the EI mindset, if you like, to be able to drive and shape the vision and the culture around that. So I think in a nutshell, that for me describes a lot of what happens in an organization in terms of what's missing. And what I found effective with working with the Adizes Institute is how you bring all of these together in a leadership team to solve problems systematically and effectively through the organization. So you're building that mutual trust and respect continuously, and people are getting their problems solved, because that's where the clashes tend to happen. And so what we do is try harder at more P&A, and because that's what we're used to, that achiever again, which is where I was stuck. And we forget about how to kind of start to look at where the organization is, where is it going, what is needed right now, and to hold lightly our drives and desires in favor of what's best for the bigger picture.
Yeah, Caroline, very interesting. This model's really something, which our, all the audience will definitely going to love. And the point you shared regarding what things needs to change, I think will be very helpful for all our leaders, what needs to change. Caroline, what is the role of a human resource in an organization in terms of bringing these best OD practices, change practices? And the most important thing in the Indian scenario, it's difficult to challenge the decision maker, the authority over there, right? So can you share some insights as per your own experience in the global level, that how HR can really impact in an organization?
Yeah, I think we put a lot of pressure on HR globally to actually be the be all and end all to solving all the human problems, and that's just simply not possible. What I see is a lot of leaders defer to HR to sort out their people issues, instead of actually the leaders themselves realizing that they are the catalyst of that and HR are the support. So I think there's a very big difference between, HR administration, which is an A role in the organization, and HR development. So, is organizational development a key part and represented at a senior level in terms of how are we integrating all of these people across the organization together to work effectively in terms of what we're doing. So the key is about how do we get people to work together, because what I see in so many organizations is this silo, HR doing one thing and then there's another part of the organization doing something else and we never really kind of come together in a symbiotic way to make all of this happen. So for a lot of HR things to be effective, it means that we've got to slow down. So, integration, which is what HR is all about, is about slowing down. It's about how do we make that connection? How do we start to listen meaningfully to what's happening in the organization and have those team conversations on an ongoing basis, day to day, and the skill to do that, so that we are integrating, we are changing, we're learning, we're innovating all of the time. So those are skills that HR can certainly bring in terms of the training, but it's about how the system tends to work against a lot of HR practices, because we're still in this drive, do mode. There's no time to do that stuff, that you do that on the weekend, which is ridiculous because it's such an integral part of the organization's health in the longer term. So I think until we get out of this silo mentality and everybody competing with each other, you've got marketing against sales and sales against HR and HR against finance and finance against accounting and accounting against everybody. It's all of this that is going on all of the time that we need to shift. And until you can get an integrative senior leadership team to work together and prioritize what are the focuses for the long-term health and effectiveness and efficiency, short-term as well, of the organization, HR is not always going to have the place at the table that it probably deserves. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Very interesting. When the performance happens, there are the people, those who are each and every function is coming in front. This is happening because of me. But when it comes to the non-performance, when the team is struggling and things are happening, deteriorating, nobody is there to take care of the responsibility. That is why it said that the success has many fathers, failure is often. Coming to the next question, share some of the best practices, especially if someone really wanted to shape the organization into the non-performance to performance. Some of the best practices, maybe the team meeting, town hall meeting, or that sort of meeting which you observed in work with the Richard Branson and some other multinational organizations.
Yeah. So let's just go to the Virgin thing first. I mean, so, when I joined Virgin, it was really in its startup days, and so there was a lot of entrepreneurial energy in there. There was a lot of P energy, a lot of drive to move things forward. So there was a very different kind of leadership style there. And it's been really hard, I think, for Richard is still involved with that. It's probably the longest he's been involved with a Virgin business. It's so hard for the founder to move out of the organization and for the organization to flourish, if you like, without that energy. Because quite often when the founder leaves, the entrepreneurial energy goes and we go back into the P and the A, because there's a plethora of P's and A's out there. But the entrepreneurial energy is what needs to stay alive. So the way that you structure an intervention, or the way you structure the way that you do that, to move the founder out, if you like, so that he stays in control in some way, but you start to bring other elements in. That's a fine art. So that has to be done kind of like really, really carefully. And when that's not done properly, it has ramifications further on. The organization can quickly move through its life cycle and quickly become old and obsolete. And all of these problems and challenges, some of which you mentioned there earlier, tend to then show up. So problems are a symptom often of a bigger context. So we often point fingers at the individual and say, well, you're the problem. Well, they're probably the one waving the flag, if you like, that we need to be paying attention to. But we kind of stamp those out in the sake of efficiency and moving on. Let's do that. So because often problems don't show up as gracefully as we would like them to. They often show up as temper tantrums and arguments. And so our ability to get to the heart of that as a leader, to really understand that, again, that system awareness and how is that impacting on the bigger system, or how is the system impacting on this, if you like, is critical. So we can't just be in our own little myopic world. And then, so then looking at the bigger picture, does the organization have a system to solve its problems? And quite often that's not the case. So you've got, as I mentioned before, conflicts happening in boards, which are all about personality and this emotional energy, if you like, which tends to push things forward. Certain people just withdraw and sit back. Certain people always come forward. So we end up going around in circles. So it needs, and again, it's quite a skill to be able to surface what are all the problems that are happening here across the organization, cross-functionally, and what's the source of this? And one person can't give you the answer to that, because you always have one leader that goes, I know what the problem is, and it's this. But quite often the problems are multifaceted. So there needs to be a way cross-functionally that teams kind of come together to solve these problems and keep solving problems ad infinitum, as the organization progresses through its life cycle. Because our problems, are they chronic, or are they just problems to do with aging? It's like, having a 2-year-old child, you might expect the 2-year-old to be kind of like to waking up at night and peeing its bed. But if you've got a 35-year-old man doing that, that's a bit of a problem. So, are the problems chronic because they've not been solved at the right stage of the life cycle? Or are they problems that are caused with aging and natural growth? And you need a symbiotic team, a synergy in the team, leadership team, to be able to solve those problems. Because what I work with further down in the organization, what you see is all these poor people in middle management trying to solve problems that they have no capacity to solve, nowhere to go with them, because they can't move them up. Like you were saying, you don't want to confront a decision maker or somebody senior in the organization, because typically they will just point the finger and tell you to go back and sort out the problem. But they're the problem, or the fact that there is no problem solving situation in the organization to help solve that problem. So it tends to just manifest in the same problems repeating themselves again and again and again. And all the energy goes into solving this and the conflict around it. And we're not moving forward, we're not actually taking our projects forward, because energy gets allocated predictably. At first go, think about it for yourself. If you are feeling a bit fed up and depressed and miserable, there's not an awful lot of energy to go out there and change the world. And it's the same in an organization. If there's a lot of conflict and turbulence, your mind goes to that. It doesn't actually kind of go to how do we get creative and innovative? And so the leadership style, the way that we solve problems, the way that we structure the solving of problems across the organization is critical. And so instead of it being about team building, and let's all get everybody together being nice to each other, it's about how do we come together to solve problems? Because that's where you see the energy just release, because people have just been frustrated for so long. Team building, where I've got to sit on the end of a rope and kind of pretend that I like you to kind of like get together as a team, is not going to solve anything. It's just going to deepen the fact that we're not actually solving problems moving forward. And it does start at the top, which I think
Absolutely. If you are suffering with, anything, any disease or anything which is related with the brain, you need to give the medicine which is really having some action on the brain rather than any part of the body. Very rightly shared by Caroline. Caroline, kindly share some of the resources for the leaders, especially for the self-development, so that if they develop, they grow, they read, right? They go through certain experiences, they can bring a lot of change in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for leaders, leadership starts with you. And so, this concept of vertical development, which is where I specialize, is critical. There's lots of articles out there. It's a burgeoning field of leadership development. And there are lots of people who are far more well-versed than I am, that have developed wonderful models and concepts. My work is very much with the how-to. My work is with the practice. How do we make leadership practical? But there's a lot of theory out there that will kind of give you a path, a flight path to follow, if you like, so that you can kind of get an understanding about where you are and what needs to change. The second thing I'd say, for leaders is, change only happens in 3 ways. The first is heat experiences. Am I in a situation where, my God, I just don't know where to go? I've hit an edge, I'm stuck. And so now I can either go back or I've got to go forward. So heat experiences are great, so it's that's one thing we want to encourage. Conflicting perspectives are another way that change happens, and also through coaching. So as an individual, having a really good coach is something that can actually help you move forward. But coaching can only be effective if you have an organizational structure that enables the coaching to work. So, I say, unless you've got a system-wide structure that is moving, then coaching doesn't have the same kind of effect. So coaching of teams, more, with organizations, part of a bigger picture concept, it's really important to do that. So that's what really helps in terms of vertical development. I would highly recommend going to the Adizes Institute in Latvia. They have some great concepts for how do you actually get boards to work together to solve problems. It's not consulting. This is about problem solving and how to work with your board where you don't have the influence that you feel to actually make that happen. So if you go to Adizes Latvia, there are some great resources there, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn to help with that. I find personal development practices are vital in leadership. So, I have been, I'm a meditation trainer. If you'd have asked me a few years ago about meditation as part of leadership, I'd have looked at you kind of like a bit crazily and thought you were smoking your socks. But in terms of that, the internal development, the vertical development, you can't do that without a practice because it starts engaging. It's moving out of the left brain head mode more into the heart and my intuition and things like that, when I'm sensing into situations. So the Heartfulness Institute in Hyderabad is a non-profit organization that teaches people in organizations to meditate free of charge. So I'm a volunteer trainer there, as are a few thousand others around the globe. So that's a great resource as well to start working with that internal stuff, if you like, while you are climbing vertically and expanding your ability vertically. So those are three things that I would think of. Yeah.
Amazing conversation with you, Caroline. A lot of insights, what you shared, really bringing a lot of value to this conversation. Any final message you would like to communicate to the leaders, upcoming leaders, and the professionals out there?
Yeah, I think, I thought hard about this when I saw that question. And I had to think, so I thought back to where I was several years ago. And a lot of leaders I speak to are deflated, they are burnt out, they are stuck, they are frustrated. And I would just say that wherever you are is actually a great place to be. I think we always think in leadership in terms of solving problems, but sometimes I think problems come up to solve us. So it's like, it's instead of rushing out there to kind of get a quick fix to your problem, it's like, what is the problem there to tell me? What is the problem there to show me? Because that's where the journey starts. And this leadership is a life journey. It's not separate. It is a life journey, which is why I find it so fascinating and why I see, all these elements of, spirituality, meditation, vertical development, culture development, problem solving in executive teams. It's all woven together because the common denominator is the human being in this. And so the final word is like, wherever you are is exactly the place you need to be, because that's where the journey starts, if you like. So I suppose I want to just offer that as a word of encouragement in terms of the frustration, because you are never stuck. I only know that now. There's always something you can do. You can make a request of somebody. You can get into a conversation with somebody. You can get into coaching. You can experiment. You can take a risk. There's lots of things you can do to move forward. And I think what we do is we find that we get so stuck and overwhelmed that we don't know what to do next. And so that first bit of advice, I think, for leaders is wherever you are, it's just put what's the next step, the one foot in front of the other, and you might always not be able to see the future. It's like sometimes I think in leadership you're on this rowing boat in the middle of the ocean without any oars, and it doesn't matter. You can't get back to that shore that you want to get back to. You've got to go a different way, but you can't see the horizon. And it's just having that faith, I think, in yourself and the system, and something bigger in some cases, that next step is the right step, because it's going to take you at some point in the right direction to deal with to have the problem solve you.
Yeah, and I feel that the coaching has a larger role to play to give the right direction, thinking, and where are you and where you really want to go.
I think you're right, Pankaj. Yeah, I mean, you'll know again, probably more than I, that that coaching plays a vital role. just a lot of people that come into coaching with me, sometimes I'm just a sounding board. But just having someone to listen to you, because we don't have that these days. We used to be in communities. I'm not sure what it's like, in India, but I know certainly in the West here, this idea of community, we don't have that. We don't have people to listen to us. There's a lot of pressure that is put on the family to be all things to us. And so coaching is a great place sometimes just to hear ourselves think, because that's where the next step sometimes comes from. Sometimes the best conversations are the ones I've had where I've hardly said a word. But people suddenly get the insight because they've been steered in a little direction, or just prompted in a little direction. So you're absolutely right. It plays a vital role, but the system has to be set up to allow it to be the right kind of support.
I feel that a lot of, the cultural thing, the background, the history, and so many things, we need to look into account when it comes to bringing the culture of coaching. It's not an overnight kind of thing, you bring today the culture of coaching and everything will change all of a sudden. But yeah, we need to start and initiate somewhere, which will be, overall helping the organization to grow. Caroline, it was really wonderful conversation with you. I feel that a lot more to learn from you on the coaching side than the leadership development side. And another important thing which we did not discuss here, the meditation, the journey which you have gone through, it's more of experience, and India has been the pioneer in terms of initiating the meditation practices. We have a number of institutes in India, NGOs, those who are promoting and keeping you for the meditation. Love to meet you in person, possibly whenever you are around in India, somewhere in Mumbai or Bangalore, just let me know. And if it happens for me to visit somewhere, in UK and Latvia, that side, I will definitely catch up with you.
Yes, for sure. Thank you thanks for the opportunity to have this wonderful and rich conversation. I think I've done most of the talking. So I'd love to continue the conversation with you. It's been a real pleasure to engage with you, and I hope that continues, whether it's virtually or in person. But I will surely let you know when I'm next in India.
Yeah. So myself is I'm is a ICF certified coach, and I do a lot of sessions, especially for the senior leaders on emotional intelligence, instructional design for HR, and like this. So which opens a lot of window for bringing a lot of intervention for the organizational development. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was really very useful and meaningful conversation with you, and this will definitely going to help all the audience and the viewers.
Thank you, Pankaj. Appreciate the conversation.
Okay, yeah.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.